The Florida Panthers unveil their 30th anniversary logo for this upcoming season. We're going to discuss the history from 1993 all the way to now, best and worst moments, and go through our favorite logos and sweaters.
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this Friday, July 28th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez, and you can follow me on Twitter at Monoman12. Follow the show account on Twitter and Instagram at LO_FLA Panthers. And shout out to the everydayers who come back here and get your daily Florida Panthers fix. And Cats fans, what a fun episode this is going to be, because with the Florida Panthers unveiling their 30th anniversary logo, this gives us an opportunity to make this episode more of 30th anniversary everything when it comes to not only the good and the bad, but just everything from on and off the ice, logos, sweaters, you name it. And who better to do it here on a Friday than my guest co-host on a Fairbanks Friday. Nick Fairbanks is here and wearing and putting some 30th anniversary flavor of his own here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast with his own Leaping Panther jersey. Nick, welcome back to another edition of Fairbanks Friday, my friend.
Thank you. And, we were waiting to see what the Panthers are going to put out as far as, were they going to celebrate the 30th anniversary? Were they going to come out with a new logo? Were they going to stick with the Leaping Panther? Were they going to stick with the shield? So very happy to see the direction that they decided to go. And can't wait to get this whole 30th festival started, so to say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you also think about what they also detail how they structure the 30th anniversary logo. You put the Leaping Panther right on top with the hockey stick, the three lines on the stick, the tape to represent each decade as well. The shield around it that represents the current logo, and actually a dedication to the Army as well, and all here. So it's a you can expect this to be at center ice throughout the season as well too. So just and to think that the Ducks have had their 30th anniversary logo for weeks now. So we were just waiting for the Florida Panthers to do this too. And I think they kind of took a little bit of an idea from the Marlins too, because when they had their 30th anniversary logo, they had the teal, but with the current Marlins logo too. So I guess the Florida Panthers decided to do it a little bit backwards in this instance too. So I just think it's respecting the past, but building towards the future. And also the video that was narrated by Bill Lindsay there. And the corniest part of that video was when he got his game winner against the Boston Bruins in round one, where he's like, when he was saying, "How'd that go in?" So just a little bit of corniness, but hey, you gotta, when it's a Florida Panthers legend narrating it, I mean, you got to put some humor in it.
Of course, this is a joyous time. I mean, a lot of NHL experts or a lot of people around the NHL probably wouldn't have given this franchise a chance after maybe 20 years, 25 years. If Doug Sifu and Vinny Viola didn't, buy the team back in 2013, 2014, who knows where they'd be right now. So, got to give them, kudos. The fact that this team is still here. They're actually being successful now, 4 straight trips to the playoffs, and, hopefully the best is to come. But this should be a joyous occasion for everybody. I mean, we've been through a lot as Panthers fans, some more than others. It depends on which decade or what year you decided to become a fan. But I think we've all bonded together over the last 3 years of the team really winning. And what better time to do that with bringing all 3 decades together of fans?
And speaking of all 3 decades, the Florida Panthers are going to have nights dedicated to each decade. 90s night will be on January 11th against the Los Angeles Kings. 2000 night will be on March 7th against the Philadelphia Flyers, and then 2010s until now is going to be March 28th against the New York Islanders. And all started with a dream of Wayne Huizenga, the owner of Blockbuster, coming in and owning 3 out of the 4 South Florida teams. At the time, the only one he never owned was the Miami Heat and all, and bringing it into the Miami Arena and making it to the Stanley Cup Final, just their 3rd year of existence, of course, with moving up to Sunrise and having and in its history having 4 different names to that arena too, owned by Broward County. The renovations for the scoreboard that happened, I believe it was like 2013 when the renovations happened at then BB&T Center as well. But also we also consider the hardships too. The team went through 3 different types of rebuilds too, with of course the very beginning one. Rod Niedermeyer was their very first pick ever. Ed Jovanovski was the number 1 overall pick the very next year. The 2010s as well. The 2010s was especially the 2010 draft was supposed to be that draft that was the full reset where you get Eric Branson there, you get Nick Bjugstad as part of the Nathan Horton trade, which the Panthers traded 4 spots back as well in that same draft, and Quentin Howden as well, who Bjugstad and Howden ended up being serviceable guys for a little while, but weren't mainstays and difference makers. And of course, we've had our fair share of criticism of Gabranson over the years as well, who's had 8 NHL teams now. So but of course the hits, Barkov, Huberdeau, Ekblad as well. But you also think about the different players who played in the Florida Panthers despite losing. Pavel Bure scoring 58 goals in back-to-back season, 58 and 59, excuse me. And then even a trade that brought in a future captain and a Vezina Trophy goalie as well in Roberto Luongo as well, and Olli Jokinen, all in that too. But it never really translated to team success neither, man.
It didn't, and I think what this ownership group has proven is that they're willing to take risks and put all their chips on the table when they feel like it's needed. I honestly can't say that about previous ownership groups, to be completely honest. It's night and day. I mean, I can honestly say that when Pavel Bure became a Florida Panther, that's when I became a Florida Panther fan. But the amount of talent that was around him and that they tried to surround him with was just him, to be honest. I mean, there was a few players like, Paul Loss, Robert Svela, that were there, and they just couldn't get over the hump. I mean, they had Ray Whitney as well, Victor Kozlov. It could have been the right players, just the wrong time. So I think that's been a lot of what Florida's had to go through. And now they're starting to hit, what they need to hit on all cylinders.
No doubt. And you think about wrong place at the wrong time as well. And you think about when it comes to making a Stanley Cup final in '96 and it being an expansion team as well. In that part, Vegas when they made it in 2018, they were the island, the misfit toys, just like the Florida Panthers were when they made the Stanley Cup final as well. And as well as, I want to go back to another rebuild that the Florida Panthers did have in the early 2000s. Stephen Weiss ended up being 4th overall, and then twice the Florida Panthers had the number 1 overall pick and traded that both times. Could have had an opportunity to get Rick Nash. I did not think that the Florida Panthers, I was not watching hockey at the time, but I'm sure the Florida Panthers were not going to go after Marc-Andre Fleury. If anything, they missed out on prime Eric Stahl in that one in 2003. That's when they got Nathan Horton in that one as well. But then you think about 2002, Jay Bouwmeester, all the problems that he had with the Florida Panthers and wanting to be out too as well, and just between relationship of coach and coach, player, management, all that. And of course, we can't discount all the rumors too of the instability here as well.
Yeah, and that's kind of, what I was alluding to earlier. You can put all the right pieces, on the roster and try to make something out of it. But if you don't have management, you don't have ownership backing completely, and you don't have the right mentality going in, it's not going to work out. As we'll get into it, I found it interesting that the video glossed over after Pavel Bure was traded and went right to 2011 when the Florida made the playoffs again, 2011-2012 season. So literally that whole era of when Weiss, Horton, and Bouwmeester were drafted, not a word, not a picture.
Those were really those were what a lot of people describe as the darkest days of being a Florida Panthers fan. And we're going to discuss, let's actually transition more to segment number 2, where we'll discuss more about those days and how you need to go through a little bit of hardships in order to get on the other side as well. We're going to discuss that and more here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. But first, we're going to tell you all about AG1. And our next partner, AG1, is something I literally drink every day because being from South Florida, drinking a lot of Cuban coffee, sometimes I need a little bit of a break. And I drink AG1 in the morning before my workout, and it makes me feel great. And it makes me feel unstoppable. It makes me ready to take on the day. And if you need a comprehensive solution, is that what you need for supplement routine? Then try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D, free AG1 travel packs in your first purchase. Go to drinkag1.com/NHL network. That's drinkag1.com/NHL network. Check it out. Segment number 2 here on this Fairbanks Friday edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, where the Florida Panthers unveil their 30th anniversary logo. We're going to talk about more of the franchise and what the Panthers have gone through over these 30 years. And also, I think about the family aspect of the Panthers now, with guys working in different parts of the organization. Roberto Luongo working in the front office, Brian McCabe being part of the player development, even the broadcast, Randy Moeller, who had a short stint with the Florida Panthers as well. Ed Jovanowski, part of that 96 team, unfortunately was part of the trade for Pavel Bure as well. But thankfully, he ended up making his way back to the Florida Panthers later on. But also, some of the hard years as well. I could only imagine watching the Florida Panthers in 2004, seeing Luongo just showing out every single night, facing 900 plus shots more than someone like Martin Brodeur, and isn't even close to the Vezina conversation there as well. I can only imagine the frustration during that time and that was an era. We don't really see this anymore of goalies playing 70 plus games. There's also an era of GMs being also head coaches as well. We don't see that in the NHL anymore. Of course, we could talk about the dead puck era versus now the 04-05 lockout, which changed everything as well. But but also that with, again, like I mentioned, guys sticking around the franchise and wanting to see this franchise grow. It's great to see, man.
There's a lot of things that could be said, about those years where it was the darkest. Not only was it the darkest for Florida, but it was probably the darkest for the NHL because of the work stoppage, and it's still yet to this day the only sport to lose a full season because of a labor stoppage. And in a way, it's embarrassing, but I think what had happened to the league after that, it came out to be better, and it became the best that it possibly has been. You had Sidney Crosby leading the way, Alex Ovechkin. You had that tandem coming out. But Florida still needed to really find themselves as far as like what they were going to do following that. I mean, they still had their young trio of Bowmeister, Weiss, and Horton, but they didn't really have anything else. They were just trying to sign guys or get guys to actually ice the team, and unfortunately, it just didn't pan out. Not enough talent to go around, and again, back to ownership, back to leadership. You make Mike Keenan the GM and the coach. Probably not going to work out. You make Jacques Martin coach and GM. It's probably not going to work out. So it was just a really trying time, and they were just really trying to find their way. And I don't think that they were able to find their way until Dale Talon came in. And I don't want to say cleaned house, but he set a new precedent, and I think he put Florida back on the map following the 2000 season, in my opinion.
Yeah, and like I've said many times on this show, there's a few things to criticize Dale Talon for, but some of the draft picks that he got right, you could give him credit for. As far as bringing someone in relation to another player, like for example Gerard Gallant, who coached Jonathan Huberdeau in junior, that's something of importance when this young winger is coming into your franchise, and you have someone who's very familiar with his game as well. And Gerard Gallant, of course, was rumored to possibly be the coach of the Calgary Flames this summer as well, and all, and we can't not mention the Tom Rowe situation as well. The Dale Talon being GM for 4 or 5 years, Tom Rowe taking over for 2, then becoming the head coach and GM, which we're going back to this conversation about Mike Keenan and Jacques Martin as well. Tom Rowe had to wear both of those hats as well in that situation too, and didn't end up well. But also, we talk about valuable trades for Pavel Bure. We can't forget Jaromir Jagr as well in this instance, coming in 2015 when the Panthers traded, I believe it was 2 second-round picks to New Jersey Devils at the time. And I said this a few years ago, Nick, where maybe I said this in 2021, where I felt the impact of Jagr was still there for Barkov, Huberdeau, and Ekblad. Now, of course, Huberdeau's gone now, but the fact that these guys are on the other end of 20, I feel like because they have matured into their own, I don't believe the impact is there as much. I'm not saying it's worn off completely. There's things you could always take away, but I believe that what Jaromir Jagr brought and the message kind of went away for a little bit.
I do think so. I think when you have a player of that magnitude, and I'm going to put him in probably the top 5, top 10 players of all time, not because of longevity, just with how good he was and how consistent he was. And he didn't really have to change too much of his game at all, whether that's, in the dead puck era, in the new era after the lockout. It was very humbling to see that he would come down here and he was able to impart his knowledge, his training regimen and everything onto Barkov and Huberdeau. But I think that can only go so far. You could lead a water to horse. Wow, that was totally backwards. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink it. And I honestly think that facilitated the trade of Huberdeau, to be honest. He took what he could from Jagr, but unfortunately, I don't think winning or putting himself out there for the team really was part of his
DNA.
Yeah, pretty much.
Oh. So yeah, and it's still great to see that moment that Jagr did get to the second all-time points, passing Gordie Howe and stopping the game. Randy Moeller has that interview with him, which is still his profile picture on Twitter, and when you go into the press box into FLA Live Arena, the Roger Nielsen press box, by the way, the first coach in Florida Panthers history, you see Randy Moeller as far as the Media Hall of Fame, him with Jaromir Jagr there as well. And speaking of head coaches, I know we've chatted about we want 10 a lot in the President's Trophy winning season, but also one of the coolest moments was, well, I don't know if this is a cool moment, but crazy situation. Doug McClain was fired in November of 1997.
Mm-hmm.
The very next game, the Florida Panthers scored 10 goals against the Boston Bruins in a 10-5 win in the Miami Arena. So crazy history there as far as what happened there, and Doug McClain being the guy who took them to the Stanley Cup final, who's very vocal too, very vocal. He was very vocal about the Gallant firing when it happened. He was even very vocal in the middle of this season too, when the Florida Panthers were just not looking like they were in the previous season as well. So a little bit of history, which Paul Maurice one playoff win away from passing Doug McClain as well. But here's also some records that the current Panthers hold, the current state of the Panthers. Just once again, letting you guys know that this version of the Panthers, we are very fortunate to be living through history right now. With
never existed.
Barkov getting the most points in Panthers history. Ekblad, most points for a defenseman, passing Robert Svela as well, and games as well. Sergei Bobrovsky, still 125 wins below Roberto Luongo. Likely not going to break that, but you think about the goalies that the Panthers have had. We didn't even mention Thomas Vokoun. You mentioned those dark years from 2004 to 2010. Thomas Vokoun was a big bright spot for the Panthers, though, in that era.
Yeah, for all the criticism he took, and you have to remember, like, watching hockey and not having Twitter or like real social media, you would go to like message boards. Like I used to post on hockey future boards. Yeah, and the criticism of Vokoun, like he couldn't stop that one. I'm like, look at everything else he's stopping though. Like the fact that he came here with Martin in his first season, and to me, he showed out. He was a great goalie. I just wish he had more help. And then you have Craig Anderson that came in and bailed him out, under Pete DeBoer. So Florida's been very fortunate in their goaltending department. I think that the trade of Luongo coming back to Florida was huge because we didn't know what was going on. Markstrom, I believe, was still kind of injured in the minors. Tim Thomas went the other way. He got traded to Dallas. And
he was not happy about that trade.
No, he wasn't, and I can understand. But at the same time, it's a business, and you should know that. But Florida's been like, you could just name the goalies that they've had. They've had Van Beesbrook. I am going to put Trevor Kidd in there because he had a lights out beginning of the season that really looked like he was going to be the guy, and then unfortunately injuries got to him. And then you have Luongo, Vokoun. I can't even really tell you who's going to be. Well, you had Jose Theodore for that one season, and then
former Hart Trophy winner.
Yeah, exactly. And then you're back to Luongo, and then he passes the torch to Bobrovsky. So hopefully that trend continues. Hopefully it's going to be Spencer Knight. If not, expect the trade, to be honest, so that we can continue what they've had.
Yep, and this franchise historically has not been shy of doing any of those as well. So we're gonna transition over to segment number 3. We're gonna discuss our favorite logos and our favorite sweaters throughout Florida Panthers history as the Florida Panthers celebrate their 30th anniversary and reveal their logo. We're going to discuss that more here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Third and final segment here on this Friday, July 28th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast is another edition of Fairbanks Friday. And I downloaded this picture and I haven't shown it on the YouTube. So I'm going to show the audience here, the YouTube, the logo that we have here. So another reason for you guys to subscribe to the channel so you guys can see a visual of not only the logo that the Florida Panthers revealed, but me and Nick's pretty faces here as well. But Nick,
That's
let's
too
talk
much.
about our some of our favorite logos and sweaters for the Florida Panthers. And early on in their days, they had the three sweaters of blue, white, and red. And let's also remind the folks that there was a time where it was switched, where the home team wore white and the dark team was the road team. So if you watch Game 4 of the Stanley Cup Final and you see Patrick Waugh in maroon, yes, they are the road team there. But I'm surprised that this current edition of the Panthers sweaters, they don't have a blue one, a dark blue one in this edition. Which it's funny because Nick, it's always the non-Panther fans who always point out the jerseys for the away versus home. One says Florida, the road jersey. The other says Panthers. I realized that more when I bought my first jersey. I'm like, okay, cool. This is a cool feature when they first brought it out in 2016. But then you have the powder blue, which, in my opinion, that's one of the ugliest uniforms in the history of the franchise. And I see Nick saying thank you with just the Panther logo face. But with the reverse retro jersey of this year, they brought back the FLA with the sun there. So I'm glad that they brought a little bit of old and a little bit of new in the current edition of the reverse retro.
That was a nice little touch. Now, if that was just the logo that they decided to go with to put on those terrible baby blue jerseys, and I don't care what anybody says, those things were hideous. And the fact that they had to get JetBlue to sponsor that is disgusting, in my opinion. Might as well just put a plane on the front and become the Jets. But anyways, so the fact is that FLA with the sun was awesome. And I think my all-time favorite logo is exactly what they put on the retro jersey this season, was the sun with the sticks and everything. I think that is quintessential South Florida hockey. I relate that to Florida hockey outside of the Leaping Panther. I'm still, in a way, not used to the shield that they have right now. But, if they get another color that they decide to go with, they try to do a darker blue jersey to switch it up. Or, you know what? I'm a big fan of the Miami Vice mock-ups that I've seen. I would love to see one game where they wear black with, the pink trim, the light blue and everything. Not powder blue, light blue, sky blue, I would say. I think that would look pretty sick on the ice. Kind of like Dallas with their jerseys.
Oh, like the glow
neon
in the
green.
dark kind of what the Dallas Stars do. Oh man, those are some of the slickest sweaters in the National Hockey League as well. And it's crazy when you think about logo change and you think about when and it's always it's very common in South Florida sports too, for them criticizing the South Florida teams as far as changing their logos. As far as the baseball front, I wish they could go back to the original Marlins logo.
Yeah.
For the Panthers, you have the different editions of the Leaping Panther as well. You have one with just the Leaping Panther with the claws. The one that you have currently here on the YouTube channel, it's more detailed as well. There's one with the hockey sticks, is the broken stick as well too there. And you know, we don't hear as much noise with the Panthers about changing the logo back as much as we do, of course, because this team is more popular, the Miami Dolphins. We always hear about throwing it back to the 70s and keep that logo forever. Here's the thing, though. We wouldn't appreciate the old logo for what it was if we had it forever. And that's the thing. And I think that's a cool thing about bringing it back every so often because it gives you that little rush when you see it. I mean, think about the reverse retros back in 2021, with that when they had the dark blue as well. They had the stick, the sun stick, and the palm tree on the side. It's like, okay, those are the Florida Panthers that a lot of people remember when they first when they first came into inception in the National Hockey League as well. So it's a little bit of, whenever I hear fans complain about that, think about that aspect. And listen, from the business side of it, where their owners are thinking about when sales peak. When you bring it back, then there's going to be that peak of sales as well. So that's why they also do it too. So that's another thing to consider.
I mean, I bought both reverse retro. I mean, I think they're my favorite jerseys now. They did a phenomenal job with both of them. If that was a partnering job between Florida and the manufacturer and everything, they did perfect. Did you know that there was a period of time that the red jersey did not exist for Florida?
Wow.
It was just white and that navy blue. And then finally, when Talon came back, we see red campaign came out. They brought the red jersey back, and that energy right there, I think, brought a little bit of life in the franchise. So red is going to be here to stay. I think I'd be interested to see what they're going to do with the new Leaping logo. Maybe they'll rebrand a little bit. I'd be interested to see that one on a mock-up jersey in the future.
I'm thinking of old slogans. We see red, one under the sun. That's another one that I could think of on the top of my head. That one's no. It's funny because there's at the ice den, I see a Broward County flag, and then I forget the exact quote. It says something under the sun. I'm like, okay, I see where the Florida Panthers got that caption from in relation to Broward County as well. So kind of a play on words as far as them. And let's also discuss more about the fan experience. We spoke about the Jumbotron that's new and improved as well, but also the seating that got replaced. There used to be like green seats, I if I'm not mistaken. So it was hideous to watch on TV, just watching old highlights of Office Depot, National Car Rental Center, but now you see it blend too, as well. So it's just, this franchise has come a long way, my friend. And like I said after the President's Trophy winning season, I'm going to say it again: keep the energy alive, Panther fans, because this part of the Panthers' history, especially with the sales likely going to peak with the 30th anniversary, it's the fan experience could be better. I hear a lot of people on Twitter complaining about it, especially from season ticket holders. We acknowledge that. But the fan experience in my opinion, has gotten so much better from when I started going to games in the early 2010s.
Well, that's what happens when, you start caring about the people who fill your building, and you want to attract more fans to come back or even invite new ones. I mean, I can only imagine, a son and a father going to a game. The father's been to a game, but his son never has. And, him going to a game maybe in the early 2000s or the late 2010 or the early 2010s, and then taking his son to a game now, how different it is, how much the atmosphere is, in my opinion, more fun. It's not as stiff, I'm going to call it, but I think that the organization's done a really good job, and I think they're going to be improving on that. I think George Richards reported that after the All-Star game, after the Stanley Cup, that the Panthers were looking to upgrade not only their sound system, but other aspects of the arena as well. So I think they're listening. I think they just needed a good example, or they needed a run like they had this last season to really put things into perspective of what a game and entertainment should be.
Yeah, and I'll tell you the truth. When I was in the building for the Stanley Cup final, they added the sound systems there.
Yep.
And the goal horn was not stupid loud when they scored. And I'm like, wow, I could actually hear the goal songs too. the it, because with the regular sound system, it would just be that over everything. You could barely hear what Andrew Imber on the PA was saying too, if that was if it happened to play at the same time, but it was at a better pitch from that. And I actually have I actually realized that honestly after like 2 weeks after the Stanley Cup final, when I was just going through my phone and
Hmm.
listening to like old videos of the Panthers coming out for warm-ups, I just took that observation of wow, the goal horn's not as loud with this system too. So hopefully we see a little bit of an example of that next season, kind of like what we saw in the Stanley Cup final. And the fans who are listening to this who were at the Stanley Cup final know what I'm talking about. And hopefully we get some of that this coming season. And hey, a team that is their stock is just going up and up, and definitely a time to celebrate for this franchise. But Nick, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this Fairbanks Friday once again to discuss this week on the Florida Panthers and their 30th anniversary and everything in between. Guys, listening, if you guys want to comment as well on the YouTube channel about anything we missed talking about on the 30th anniversary, please tell us, because we did not neither of us have watched this team from beginning to end, and some of
Hmm.
you listening have. So tell us anything that we missed talking about as well. So we would like to hear back from you. But Nick, thank you so much, and tell everybody where they can follow you.
Armando, thank you again. This was really fun. Just reminiscing about how far this team has come from the dark days to the golden days that we're living right now. But two things that I want to bring up. Number one, for one of the nights, I want fans to have cowbells because that was a huge thing during the Horton, Weiss, and Booth days. David Booth, there's a name drop. And then I think everybody in the arena for one of those games as well should have a rat in their seat,
Yes.
and let's just go to town. And because that is the identity right there. So as I was going, you guys can follow me at Prudentious0 on Twitter and on Threads at Bure1096.
Awesome, Nick. Thank you so much, and I will see you next week, my friend.
Thank you. See you next week.
And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey with Flip Livingstone and Stu Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. They can make the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. And every day is make sure you come back next week for next week's edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, as we will be having a very special guest on Monday's edition of the show to talk about their journey through the sport of hockey. So I'm Armando Velez with Nick Fairbanks, and you've been listening to Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.
Your Locked